One of my latter tours in Afghanistan was as a task force operations officer. I was the operations officer for a task force that was operating throughout Afghanistan, and then I was the deputy operations officer and the operations officer on two separate tours. But on one of those tours, my boss, we'll call him Big Ed, this guy was an amazing, amazing officer, an amazing leader. And he was responsible for dozens upon dozens of special operations forces from different services, from different countries, operating in some of the most diverse, complex situations you could ever imagine. And I was fortunate enough to work very close with this man and for years, but in particular in combat, and observe how he went through the process of leadership, how he went through the process of mission analysis, how he assessed risk, how he thought about impact, how he thought about loss, and how he dealt with it. And I watched this man make so many decisions in his life that affected the lives of not just his men and his women, but also their families back home, because sometimes these folks didn't come home when they conducted these missions. And one of the things that I noticed about Big Ed was that when he would make these decisions, you could see the weight that he would carry on his shoulder when he made them. Oftentimes, he would stroll off by himself whenever he could and just take a few moments to himself and process however he needed to process. But he carried that weight alone, right? He did not share that burden, really. He knew that was his to carry. He knew that was his loneliness of command. In fact, he often talked about that to me, and just in that it was a requirement for a commander. I felt versions of that in my career, though I never led at the scope that Big Ed did. I had my own moments as a commander, and there were times when I had to make decisions, that were not easy decisions, and they affected people's lives. And in some cases, decisions I made in combat similarly affected people not coming home. And it was a very, very lonely place to be. And whether you were making a decision on whether or not to launch a mission or to assess and assume a level of risk that maybe was pretty high, or whether you were, once I had to make a decision to cut a couple of teams that simply could not go into combat because they weren't ready. And I needed to make sure that they were ready. And I had to tell them they couldn't go into combat. And that was one of the hardest things I ever did. And I will just tell you that the loneliness of command is true for any of us who have to lead. You see, leadership is a personal endeavor. Leadership is a human endeavor. Whether you're leading in a commercial bank, whether you're leading in corporate America, whether you're leading a nonprofit, whether you're a leader at school as a teacher, it doesn't matter. Or whether you're, law enforcement leading people. Leadership involves leading human beings. And a lot of times we're going to have to make decisions that are not easy decisions, right? There is a weight that goes with it, and it's not easy. And I think in this day and age, one of the things that we fail to teach our young leaders as they are coming up in the ranks is that there is a loneliness of command. There is a weight of leadership that one must bear when going through the tough decisions in life. And you cannot outsource that. You cannot avoid that. You cannot deflect that. And I've seen some very senior leaders of late, particularly in corporate America, right, who frankly should know better, who avoid the loneliness of command, right? And some of them do it by pursuing popularity with their associates and not making the hard calls. Some of them do it by putting the hard calls off on a subordinate, or some of them do it just by pretending the whole thing doesn't exist. None of those work. None of those serve your people. At the end of the day, leadership is about people. It's about making decisions and managing energy, as Professor James Clausen says, energy of ourself and energy of those around us. And loneliness of command, weight of leadership is a necessity that goes with that, because we're not going to get it right all the time. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have to iterate. Wes and I were just talking off camera about the play Last Out, which is at lastoutplay.com, by the way. But we were talking about some of the mistakes that I've made and some of the things that have happened with the cast and the crew, and just it's hard. And there's decisions that I have to make as the creator of this play that are not easy decisions, right? But I have to make them. And I have to make them for the sake of something bigger than me. So here's what I would tell you. You can't avoid the loneliness of command. But what I will say is that you can make it easier to bear. The first thing that I would tell you is when you make decisions in this world, whether you're assessing risk or whether you're having to do something punitive and reprimand somebody or even let someone go, if you have a purpose bigger than yourself, if there's a vision that the organization is moving after that is bigger than you are, bigger than they are, then a lot of times when we have to make these hard calls, we true back to that higher purpose. We true back to that higher vision. Just like Big Ed did, he knew that his charter for being in Afghanistan was far bigger than him, far bigger than our unit, and that the decisions that he made were obligatory in that context. In other words, he had to serve that higher purpose. I challenge you to do the same thing. Whatever your leadership scope is, when you got to make the hard calls and you're thinking about the loneliness of command, look at the purpose bigger than you and true back to that, and include that when you communicate that to your people. Speaking of communicating it to your people, even though we have to endure the loneliness of command, it doesn't mean that we must be isolated. In fact, I believe it's essential that we over-communicate with our people, our peers, and our seniors in what's going on in our lives. We need to over-communicate. We need to talk about what's going on, as Professor Stuart Diamond says, right? The more we can over-communicate, the better. And then finally, you know what I've found that works really well is find yourself a mastermind of like-minded leaders who are going through similar loneliness of command. They may not even be in your industry. They may not be in your organization. In fact, I say that's great. I have a 4-person mastermind with five-person, Dr. Ara Sapaya, who's the golf doctor for the Ryder Cup. Jerry Lujan, Elevation 180, who's he coaches insurance leaders. David Martin, right, who is he's a business consultant, right? And myself and Greg Parsons, who runs a wealth management company. We're all very different, but we all experience the leadership of command, and we go through things that only we understand. So look at getting yourself an informal mastermind that can circle around the table and talk about it. All of those things will help you deal with it, but you can never avoid it. The loneliness of command is part of the necessary burden of leading people and doing the right thing. So don't push away from it, lean into it, accept it, and lead strong from that place. Thanks for what you do, and I'll see you on the rooftop.